First things first, if you're going to sew a lightweight, flowy, silky dress, get rid of the machine needle you've been using for previous projects. Having the right needle is crucial. You can probably see the runs on the fabric here. They emerged during the dart construction, most likely because the needle was defective, not overused. Anyways, this will happen to your delicate fabric if you don't swap the needle for the new, thinner and sharper one. I recommend using size 70 needles, they are quite appropriate. By the way, every tip in this video applies not only to natural silk but also to any slippery, lightweight, flowy fabrics that have similar properties. The fiber content may as well be 100% polyester, the most important thing is that the fabric is slippery and thin. So choose a thinner needle, and it has to be new. When you start, you carefully lay out the fabric and spread it on the table, making sure it lies nice and straight. It may seem that the fabric is perfectly straight, but once you cut out the pieces, it turns out they're all crooked and don't match the pattern. Slippery fabrics are super tricky. To ensure the fabric lies straight crosswise, I recommend pulling out a thread. This is how you do it. After pre-treating the fabric, lay it out on the table and clip into the selvage near the cut edge. You'll then see a couple of threads popping out. You simply need to pull out one of them. Pull the thread carefully and slowly so that it doesn't break. As you can see, it leaves a visible straight trail that can be used as a reliable guide. Now we can actually check if the fabric was cut the right way. Don't rush. Notice that I'm pulling out a thread along the crosswise grain. I've just started pulling and we already can see such a huge piece of fabric that needs to be disregarded. I know, it's sad to waste so much fabric. But if you cut out the pattern pieces without doing this, they will all be deformed. Don't hesitate to do this, it's so helpful and it guarantees you will end up with a beautiful garment. If the thread you're pulling suddenly breaks, don't worry. Cut off the extra fabric along the trail up to the point where your thread broke. You will be able to find it again and continue pulling until you reach the opposite selvage. Check this out, the original distance was about 1.5 centimeters and then it turned into 3 centimeters and more. This is why it's always better to buy a bit more fabric than you need for the project. Most of the time, they don't take time to cut the fabric straight in the shops. Now we can either cut off that extra amount or mark along the thread trail for better visibility. You may also just use the thread trail as a guide if you see it well. When you proceed to cut out the pieces, this line should be straight as well as the selvage. Here's another little tip. When you start cutting out the pieces, you might notice that the fabric is wavy along the selvage. It's not really obvious in this fabric, but sometimes there's a lot of puckering. This means that the selvage is too tense, which can also lead to cutting errors. What can you do about it? There are two options. You can either clip into the selvage as many times as needed to release the tension, or simply cut off the entire selvage. If you choose to clip, cut up to the rows of holes. Make as many cuts as you want, the main goal is to make the fabric lie as straight as possible along the selvage. Notice how there's no more waviness around here. A few more cuts and the fabric will lie almost flat. Do you see how much several cuts can do? There are no more waves along the selvage. If it doesn't seem to help with your particular case, feel free to just cut off the entire selvage. The waviness will be completely eliminated. Have you ever seen a woman in a shiny silk dress that looks gorgeous but has details weirdly different in color intensity? When some parts are darker and some, on the contrary, are lighter. This difference can look especially obvious along the seam lines. At the side seam, for example, or along the center back seam, if there is one. This can happen if you cut out the pieces placed exactly as shown in the video, which means in different directions. One of the pieces is placed in one direction, and the other one is placed in the opposite one. This will result in pieces having different shades if you're working with silk, satin, and other similar fabrics. Therefore, when you cut the fabric, the pattern pieces should be all placed in one direction. Of course, we all strive to save as much fabric as we can. To avoid having some parts of your garment looking more dull than the others, check if that happens at all with your fabric first. Take your fabric and try it on yourself, with the right side up. Let it hang down from your arms, to the right and to the left. Try different lighting and check in the mirror whether any part looks lighter or darker than the other. If you don't see the difference, you can try placing the paper patterned pieces in different directions. Although I still recommend being very careful with that. The other trick is to use additional fabric when cutting out the pieces. Don't we all have our precious fabric stashes? You can use coating fabric, for instance. Denim will work as well. Here's my long-suffering piece of denim that is always here to help me. You can fold it into multiple layers. This will actually make the silk stick to the fabric's surface better when you start cutting. Carefully lay out the silk on top of the additional fabric. This way the silk won't slip away and off the surface. I've laid it this way as an example so that you can see how the denim layer stops the silk from slipping. Here's another tip that you can find useful when cutting silky fabrics. It will come in handy if you're using additional fabric and if you're trying to manage without it. Simply lay your fabric along the edges of the table you're using. If you usually cut on the floor, you can align the fabric with the walls or furniture. Position the fabric right along the table edges. The selvage is aligned here, and the cut edge lies straight over here. This alignment makes it easier to ensure the fabric is placed correctly. The other little thing that can actually ruin your entire project is the chalk you're using to transfer markings onto the fabric. I know that some people like using wax-based chalk or even remnants of hand soap bars, but I strongly recommend avoiding them when working with delicate fabrics. These types of chalk are known to leave grease stains on fabric after you press the markings. Consider opting for clay-based chalk. Yes, it's not pleasant to the touch, and it will make your fingers dirty. Yes, you will have to sharpen it and clean the mess it leaves behind. But it won't leave any grease stains that will be impossible to remove. It would be such a shame to have your entire stunning dress ruined, all because of a tiny piece of wax chalk. Here's another thing worth mentioning. And this applies to all kinds of fabrics, not only silky ones. Often we use light-colored or white fabrics for party and evening dresses, which means that the regular chalk markings will be barely visible or not visible at all. I have to warn you, don't ever use colored chalk. Every day I hear the stories of how garments get completely ruined with it. If you're sewing with a white or light-colored fabric, transfer all the markings with hand stitches instead of chalk. Please bear this in mind. If you're rather new to sewing with slippery fabrics, you might not know how to tackle this stuff. For example, the seams in garments made of delicate fabrics often pull apart, so the stitch length and seam allowances matter greatly. If you're planning to make a dress with a silky fabric, make sure the sewing pattern is drafted with sufficient ease allowances. Otherwise, the seams will just pull apart and the garment will be ruined. So you either choose the fabric that doesn't allow for the seams to slide apart or choose the designs that have enough ease. Such garments won't be too close-fitting, which will make the seams more durable. The other thing to remember is that the thinner the fabric, the shorter should be the stitch. Use a 2 mm stitch length to make your seams more reliable and prevent them from pulling apart. You can always try sewing seams on a scrap of your fabric and check what happens to the seam if you strain it. See if it stays intact. Make sure the pattern design suits the fabric. The test might reveal that your fabric would work better for some other, looser garment. This fabric looks quite suitable for close-fitting designs. But if you doubt that your fabric is reliable enough, you have the option of going for the French seam technique. It will increase the durability of the seams and most likely prevent them from sliding apart or ripping. The other thing worth mentioning is the hand needles and threads you use for sewing. For example, you could automatically grab the good old thick needle that you've just been using to baste the coat pieces. That needle will leave visible holes in your delicate fabric, so please use the thin ones that are meant for silk. The ones I'm holding will do, but you can actually get yourself beading needles which are even thinner. Such needles won't damage or leave holes in your delicate fabric. Thin thread is also a must. In fact, you simply won't be able to thread the size 70 machine needle with a thick thread. I would recommend looking for Madeira, Mettler, or Gutermann threads. They can be a bit pricey, but they're very reliable. Maybe there are other good thread brands in your country. But speaking from personal experience, door tack threads, for example, might look sort of rough on delicate, luxe garments. It happens to the best of us. Imagine you're sewing a dress for the Christmas or New Year's Eve party, your hands get too dry, and you apply a generous layer of hand cream. And then you accidentally leave an annoying grease stain on your expensive fabric. Or maybe your sewing machine stains your project with oil. Super sad. But what can be done? I don't have a stain here, but we can pretend there is one. Let's see how we can remove it. Let's imagine the stain is here. Grab your clay-based chalk, the one that is dusty and rough to the touch. And start carefully crumbling it over the stain. It's the one thing you can do if there's no other aid on hand. In fact, there are special sprays that can do the job. We use them as well, but not many sewists have them on hand in case of such an emergency. So you just need to crumble your chalk over the stain and let the crumbs sit on it for a while and absorb the grease. Then you just need to brush them off. This life hack is super helpful. Just a couple of days ago we at VikiSews had to remove an accidental stain this way. After you've let the chalk crumbs sit on the stain, shake them off and then wipe the spot with a dry tissue. Next, you need to place the fabric on the ironing board, cover the stain with that tissue, and press with an iron. This will also help with removing the stain. Don't press the stain as it is though. Press it only after you've treated the spot with chalk. I'm going to end this video with another important little trick. We tend to use slippery, delicate fabrics to make bias cut garments. It's all because lightweight, flowy fabrics usually work amazing for bias cut designs. But silky fabrics can actually have immensely different properties. They can be different in terms of bounce, pliability, flexibility, and so on. So sewing the same dress pattern but with different fabrics can result in drastically different results, even if the fabrics looked and seemed similar. One of them can feel too tight, while the other one can end up having a looser fit. Therefore, if you're using a fabric you haven't worked with yet, I recommend adding extra width to the drafted seam allowances as a backup. Definitely add up to 2 centimeters to the side and shoulder seam allowances. Also, add about 1.5 centimeters to the arm size seam allowances. You probably won't manage to add more. Of course, add some width to the seam allowances on the sleeves and other main construction seams. This will allow you to fix the fit if you find it too tight. And if you're satisfied with the fit, you can just cut off that added extra width and proceed with the construction. These were my 10 tips on sewing with silk. Did I miss anything? Share your tips and tricks in the comments below. Let's gather all the advice and experience for fellow sewists who want to work with delicate, difficult, luxury fabrics. Give us a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.